Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we begin our study of the last segment of chapter 1 of the Sefer Iyov, the book of Job. We just read of the heavenly discussion between God and the Satan. We described in the last podcast what it means, what the Satan is, and what that represents, that concept represents. And at this point, he has just been given permission to allow to the taking away of all of the wealth and bounty and things that Iyov enjoyed in this world, because he challenged God and said, yes, sure, Iyov is a faithful servant of yours. He lives life with purpose. He lives life with the understanding that God is the creator, and that one gets that all we get in this world is from God, and he lives life with that humility and understanding. And but that's only because he gets a lot out of it, because he's rich, he's wealthy, he has all these children, he has all this property. Take it all away and he won't be so faithful. So God said, okay, go ahead. So Vayihi Hayom, and the day arrived, or a day arrived, right? This is verse 13. Uvanav uvanosav ochlim vishosim yayin, and his children are eating and drinking wine, beveis achiyam habochar, in the house of the eldest brother. So everything was wonderful, it was idyllic, it was a day of eating and drinking, and everybody's happy. Umalach ba Iyov vayomar, and a messenger comes to Iyov and says as follows: Habakar hayu chorshos. The bakar, the cattle were, the oxen were plowing. Viha asonos roos al yidehem, and the donkeys were grazing nearby. You know, everything was going along as usual. Vatipol shiva vatikachem, and bandits from Sheba, right, which is generally considered, which is an ancient kingdom around the location of modern-day Yemen somewhere, which makes sense because remember Edom was the land of Edom, where we assume the land of Uz is located, is southeast of modern Israel, somewhere in the region of Jordan. So it makes sense that bandits from Shiva would come, Vatikachem, and they stole them all. V'yetana arim hikulefi chara, and they struck down all of the young men, all of your employees, everyone who was working with the cattle and the donkeys, the shepherds, the caretakers, the plowers. They struck them all down and killed them all. V'imoltorak ani levadi lahagid lach, and I was the only one left to come and bring you the news. So we just lost all of the camels. And before Iyov even had a chance to react to this terrible tragedy, Od Zeh Medaber, while this one was still speaking, V'zeh ba vayomar, and this one comes and says, Eish Elohim nafla min hashamayim, a fire of God fell from heaven, vativar batzon, and destroyed the sheep, uvan'arim, and the shepherds that were watching the sheep, vatochlem, and destroyed them all. This could have been maybe a volcanic eruption, or maybe just a fire, a forest fire that just overtook them all, or a brush fire, or maybe a lightning strike started a fire. Regardless of what happened, this tragedy is awful. And only I am left in order to bring you the news. That's all I have here is news for you. Od Zeh Medaber, while he was being informed of this terrible tragedy, V'zeba, and another one came by Omar, and he said, Kasdim, the Chaldeans. Kasdim is a group of people closely related to the Babylonians. They were an ethnic group among the Babylonians living in modern day, somewhere in modern day southern Iraq. And they for a point in time, they actually ruled the Babylonian Empire by the Chaldeans. So often in Tanakh, Kasdim and Bavliim are kind of used interchangeably because they were a closely related ethnicity. But regardless, there was Kasdim Samu Shlosha Rashim. there was some Chaldeans who made three groups, three raiding parties. Vayifshetu al hagmalim vayikachum, and they were thus able to lay some kind of ambush against all of the camels, and they stole them all. And while stealing the camels, all of your men who tried to defend them, they struck down by the sword all of the men who were watching the camels. And it's only me that was left in order to bring you this news. This one was still bringing him this terrible news, and then another one comes, Vayomar, and says, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in the house of their eldest brother. And a terrible wind, a big storm, a hurricane, a tornado, some kind of big storm, came from across the wilderness. And it struck all four corners. In other words, the entire house, and toppled the entire house on the young people in the house, and they all died. And I was the only one left in order to bring you this news. Maybe he was a servant in the house who somehow escaped, and I'm bringing you this news. Vayokam Iyov gets up. He was obviously sitting when he received this news. The assumption here being Iyov, and as we shall see during the poetic portion, during the wisdom portion of this book, the bulk of the book, which is a discussion which we're going to come to, that Iyov was a judge. So he was probably sitting in the gates of the city in judgment. Iyov was like the chief judge or the head, and in those days, that was the main leadership position, was the one who sat in judgment. So the idea being here that he was sitting in judgment at his usual workplace, but when he received the news, and he stands up, Vayikras mi'ilo, and he tore his coat, Vayagaz es rosho, and he shaved his head, which was a typical sign of mourning in those times. Vayipol artz, and he fell to the ground. Vayishtachu, and he prostrated himself, he bowed down. Vayomer, and he says, a very famous and tragic phrase, often quoted in times of suffering, in times of sorrow. Arom yatzasti mi beten imi, I came out naked from my mother's womb. Vi arom ashuv shama, and naked I shall return to there. The comparison here between the beten imi, he's not returning to his mother's womb, is the idea that he understands that when one comes into this world, one comes in with nothing. Just like a person's mother is symbolic of everything that goes into the bringing of life into this world. Going back to the earth, going back to where we came from, is going back to the Creator who brought all of this all about so that we should come. And there's a lot in this phrase here that is important to point out, and that is the appreciation. One who understands and appreciates that there is a Creator, one who understands and appreciates that God created this world and we're here for a purpose, understands and appreciates that everything we get is a gift. I came into this world just a person. I'm leaving this world just a person, and I return my body to God. That is how this is obviously going to be, is what Iyov has said, and so it shall be. I don't deserve anything. The humility that comes to someone who recognizes the existence of a Creator and the importance of that idea and that concept is a person who can say these statements. Adonai nasan, God has given, v'Adonai lakach, and God has taken. The humility that comes along with the recognition that there is a God is the humility that Iyov is displaying here. Arom yatzasi, arom ashuv. Naked I came in, naked I will return. God gives, God takes. Yehi shem Adonai mevorach. May the name of God be blessed. In other words, I still appreciate and I still understand the opportunity to be on this world, and that I can still fulfill the purpose that God put me here for. B'chol zos lo chata Iyov. With all of this suffering, Iyov did not sin. Now, over here, chata, the word chet often is translated correctly, so as sin, but it also means to miss the mark, right? Right? When someone shoots an arrow and misses the mark, that's called a chet. That's called he missed, right? And the point here is that Iyov didn't miss the mark. Iyov didn't make that terrible mistake and say there's no point and there's no purpose. He understood that there is a point, there is a purpose, and he recognized that just as he was faithful to God when he had everything that anyone could possibly want, similarly he's also faithful to God when he has nothing. V'lo nasan tifla le'eluhim. And he did not, and this is an odd kind of phrase here, which the word, and he did not put tifla to God. Now, tifla is a little challenging to translate, but I'm going to go with one of the translations to this term tifla. Is we find in many places that the term tifla means nothingness, silliness, right? Or making light of things, cynicism. So in other words, he did not give tifla to God, which means he did not say, to give tifla to God would be to say that God doesn't care, right? God created a world and everything is just random. Everything just happens. He ignores it, like he doesn't care. Iyov, despite the fact that that God himself said that Iyov, look at my servant Iyov, he's tam v'yashar, he's a perfect person, he's upright and he's righteous and he's good in every possible way, right? And then he goes through this terrible, terrible suffering, the unimaginable suffering, the loss of all of his children, all of his wealth, all of his property. He did not fall into the trap of stating that God doesn't care, that God is not involved, that God, that there is no purpose to this world, there is no reason for us being here. This is where the first chapter ends, with this incredible strength on the part of Iyov, it's incredible, but in the face of this terrible, terrible suffering. Unfortunately, the suffering that Iyov is going to endure is not over yet. We will study again in chapter 2 together how this continues to spiral out of, well, not out of control is not the right word, but it continues to spiral down into something even worse. Sorry to have to end on this depressing note, but it's not so depressing because the little sliver of hope here is that Iyov was lo chata, Iyov did not sin, Iyov did not miss the mark. Thank you so much for studying the first chapter of the book of Iyov together. Looking forward to studying chapter 2 and the rest of this book together. Have a wonderful day.